On October 7, 1780, a British officer named Patrick Ferguson stood on top of a wooded ridge in the Carolina backcountry and told his men that God Almighty could not drive him off it. 65 minutes later, he was dead, shot from his horse, one boot still caught in the stirrup, as his own frightened animal dragged his body down the slope. The men who killed him were not soldiers. Most of them had never worn a uniform in their lives. They were farmers, hunters, and settlers from beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Men Ferguson himself had sent a message to only weeks earlier, warning that if they did not lay down their arms, he would march over the mountains, hang their leaders, and burn their homes to the ground. That threat was supposed to frighten them into submission. Instead, it built the army. That ended him. To understand how a warning became a death sentence, you have to understand who Patrick Ferguson actually was. He was Scottish, a career British officer, and by 1781 of Cornwallis's most trusted subordinates in the Southern Campaign, notably the only man in the entire Loyalist force at Kings Mountain who was not American-born. Everyone under his command, roughly 1,000 men, was a colonist who had chosen the king's side. Ferguson was a genuine innovator, credited with designing one of the first breech-loading rifles used by the British Army, and he had a reputation as a sharp, aggressive commander who got results. Cornwallis had sent him west into the Carolina foothills that autumn with a specific job: recruit loyalists, secure the flank of the British advance into North Carolina, and keep the frontier settlers from causing trouble. The people Ferguson was supposed to keep quiet were the over-mountain men, settlers living in the valleys beyond the Blue Ridge in what is now eastern Tennessee. Most of them had stayed out of the war entirely, too far from the fighting to care much which king or Congress ran the coast. Ferguson decided to make them care. He sent a captured militiaman back across the mountains with a message for their leaders: stop resisting, or he would cross the mountains himself, hang their commanders, and lay their settlements to waste with fire and sword. It was meant to be a threat. It was received as a declaration of war on their homes. Within days, militia leaders on the western side of the mountains, Isaac Shelby, John Sevier, William Campbell among them, began raising men, not hundreds, over 1,000 riding and walking out of hollows and valleys that had never sent a single soldier. To the Continental Army, they crossed the mountains in cold, wet weather, some without proper shoes, driven less by loyalty to the revolution than by a simple, personal fact. This British officer had said he was coming for their families. Ferguson had wanted to frighten a population into passivity. He had instead handed that population a reason to march. Ferguson learned the militia was coming and pulled his force back toward Cornwallis's main army, but he made one final decision that would define the battle. He stopped on a ridge called Kings Mountain, a long, narrow, wooded hill with steep, rocky slopes, and decided to make his stand there instead of continuing the retreat. He believed the position was unassailable, and told his men so directly, boasting that the Almighty himself could not force him from it. What Ferguson had actually chosen was a hill covered in trees, which meant cover for exactly the kind of fighter the frontier had produced in abundance. Men who had spent their entire lives hunting deer and fighting in the woods, with long rifles, moving from tree to tree, firing from cover, reloading, and firing again. The over-mountain men reached Kings Mountain on the afternoon of October 7th, exhausted from days of hard riding, and did not wait to rest. They surrounded the base of the ridge on all sides and began climbing. Ferguson's men had bayonets and discipline built for open field volleys, the kind of fighting that had crushed militia lines at Camden and a dozen other battles that year. But there was no open field here. There was a slope full of timber, and on that slope, bayonet charges meant driving downhill into men who simply stepped behind a tree, took aim, and waited. Each time, the Loyalists charged one side of the ridge and pushed the militia back. Another group of riflemen closed in from the opposite slope. The circle never broke. It only tightened. If a story like this is new to you, this is exactly the kind of forgotten turning point we cover every week. So go ahead and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Ferguson rode back and forth across the hilltop the entire battle, blowing a silver whistle to rally his men and direct counterattacks, refusing to surrender even as the ring of riflemen closed tighter around the summit. He was hit by rifle fire again and again. Accounts describe as many as 7 or 8 wounds before he finally went down, his foot catching in the stirrup as his horse bolted, dragging his body across the ground in front of his own collapsing line. With their only regular officer dead, the Loyalist force began waving white flags. Some men threw down their arms immediately. In the chaos and fury of the moment, not every militiaman honored the surrender right away, and a number of Loyalists were shot down even after raising their hands. Before Shelby and the other commanders got the killing, stopped and enforced the surrender. The entire engagement lasted about 65 minutes. When it was over, Ferguson's force of roughly 1,000 men had ceased to exist as a fighting unit. More than 150 killed, several hundred wounded, and nearly 700 taken prisoner. The Overmountain men had lost around 28 killed and 60 wounded, a fraction of the damage they had inflicted. Historians have compared King's Mountain to a wasp's nest kicked open, a threat meant to intimidate a scattered, disengaged population instead concentrated it into a single furious swarm, and that swarm did not disperse until the man who provoked it was dead. Cornwallis, hundreds of miles away, got the news and immediately called off his planned invasion of North Carolina, pulling his entire army back into South Carolina to regroup. The frontier militia had not just killed one officer, they had stopped a British invasion in its tracks, buying time that would eventually lead to Cowpens and, within a year, Yorktown. The Reach is a national military park today, quiet and wooded, much as it was in 1780. Walking it now, it is hard to imagine that a man once stood at the top of it and told his soldiers no power on earth could remove him, and was proven wrong in barely over an hour by the very people he had tried to threaten into silence. And if you want more stories like this, the forgotten battles that actually decided the revolution, subscribe, because there are a lot more of them coming.